You're listening to the Real Women in Business podcast. I'm your host, Cass McCrory, and in this podcast, we highlight women in all kinds of businesses. For yourself, someone else, full-time, part-time, overtime hustle, together we will learn from and with one another. And if we get it right, it'll lift us all. Let's get into it. Friends, I'm so excited to introduce you to Liz Tinkham today. On the podcast, we are going to talk about her incredible career within Accenture for over 30 years, kind of what she's doing now that she's in this new phase that she's deeming pre-tired. We're going to talk about some actionable things that she does each week to stay in touch and current, her biggest piece of advice, and how she dealt with a difficult time in her career. This is a meaty episode. I'm so excited to share it with you. Let's dive in. Liz, welcome.
Thank you.
Would you mind sharing a few words about who you are?
Sure. Thank you for that nice introduction. So I'm a career consultant, having worked at Accenture for over 30 years. Retired a couple years ago, and now I should say pre-tired. A friend of mine coined that term because I'm not really retired in full. I'm teaching at the University of Washington, so I'm a professor there, and I'm doing quite a bit of board work, both not-for-profit and for-profit companies. And given that I worked so hard my whole career, I'm also trying very hard to spend a lot more time with my husband, my 3 children, and my immediate family.
That's awesome. So I would love to know, I know from LinkedIn and other places, you had a really amazing career path within Accenture. And that is historically and has been a historically pretty male-driven environment. And I would love to know kind of what that journey was that got you to this place where you get to advise businesses and not-for-profits.
I'd love to answer that question. So, just to go back, and I tell people this all the time, when I was in high school, I remember my high school calculus class had about, it seemed to me, half of the class was women and half the class was men, or girls and boys. And there was a gal who sat behind me in class, and I remember looking at a score we got on a test and talking about where we're going to go to college. And we both had gotten a very high score, and we were, I was thinking I was going to go to some lofty engineering school, which I ended up going to Ohio State, but wasn't maybe as lofty as I originally wanted. And she was going to go off to Yale, and we thought nothing of it, right? We were probably the top 2 students in our class. We were headed off to whatever school we wanted to go to, and we really weren't thinking about any gender differences at that point. When I went to Ohio State, I studied engineering, and I was an aerospace engineer, and there were 9 women in a class of about 100. And I think I did realize that there were definitely, where are all the women? But it didn't bother me at all because I loved the work and I loved the studies. And, I think I somewhat dismissed all of it, sort of like, well, the other women are just sort of missing out. And there were women who were in my sorority who were studying computer science, engineering, and mechanical engineering. So again, I didn't think about it. And then I get to Accenture and the summer start group, and we have 50 people. And guess what? And this is in 1984, half women, half men. So my worldview at that point was very much of I guess I see some differences, but not really. And through the course of my career, which I was working very hard, I don't really think I saw much of it. And I didn't realize that there was such a decline in the number of women who were graduating from high school and college in the sort of STEM fields that would allow them then to become Accenture employees, right? Because even though we hire people from all walks of life, or we did hire from all walks of life, we tend to favor people with technical skills because that's what we do. And it wasn't until I was much, much more senior, I'd become an Accenture partner. Then we went public, so I was an Accenture managing director. And at that point, I looked around and thought, oh my gosh, I'm always the only woman in the room who's actually doing a P&L role. And it became more acute the more senior I became at Accenture. But I never felt that I was discriminated against or I was held back at all because I was a woman. As a matter of fact, I don't think I was necessarily promoted because I was a woman, but I certainly was able to use my voice maybe more than a man who was in the same position I was, because I was always the only woman in the room. And as I said, when I got to be very, very senior, so sort of towards the end of my career, and I was more focused on working with our senior management on inclusion and diversity issues, that's when I really started to realize, oh my gosh, I had a very fortunate path. I worked for women. As I said, my early lens was very much of a gender neutral thing. So I never had felt any discrimination, but I realized that had gone on. And, it was really incumbent upon all of us to work to fix it. And so, really buckled down on trying to figure out how do I replicate the same path that I've had for all the other women at Accenture.
I love that. And thank you for sharing all of that, because I think, and this is a theme that I've seen in a number of these conversations that I've had to have and gotten to have in the last couple of months here, is that women that are really thriving, there was never a point, and I can say this for me too, I've never been in a place where I was like, oh, I feel like I've been shunned because of my femininity or my womanness, that's never, I never had that experience. And so I think it's really interesting that you also didn't have that particular experience. I'm glad that we didn't. And I also love that you're willing and you see the opportunity to step up to make sure that even more people had that same experience that we had.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I can cite some things that are probably still happening where women are included, which would be non-sponsored events. So people will go out for dinner together, or there'll be a meeting that just happens to be all men, and it will be a more informal discussion around people's performance or getting people staffed on the right projects, that type of thing, or moving people. And I'm sure I missed out on some of that. But I never really felt it was a purposeful exclusion. It was just sort of more of a scale thing, right? I either wasn't in that group at the same time or wasn't at that meeting, so wasn't out at the dinner. And that probably, and I think in some of those cases it could hurt you. But again, I think over time I was able to overcome some of that.
Yeah. I think that's a really great outlook on it. And I'm loving that we're sharing that. So You're in high school, you're in calculus, you have this kind of ambitious nudge, and you go into aerospace.
Right.
How did you go from aerospace into Accenture?
Well, so when I went to interview for jobs, I interviewed at all the usual suspects, sort of, what was then Lockheed Martin, a couple of GE's engine company, several other aerospace companies. And I distinctly remember being down at Lockheed Martin in Fort Worth, Texas, and they put me on a golf cart. And remember, it was 1984, so I'm wearing the requisite suit and the bow tie, the whole works. It's hotter than heck down there. And we get on the golf cart, and they drive me, the place is enormous because they were making, I think, the F-16 there. They drive me out to one corner of the building where some of the engineers were, and the guys there are showing me that they're designing a screw. And then they drive me another 20 minutes to get to another corner of the building to show me the one female engineer. And I thought, I don't think I could design a screw for the next 2 years. And I had a couple friends of mine who worked for what was then Arthur Andersen's consulting division in Columbus, Ohio, where Ohio State is. And they were telling me, you would love this place. It's your personality. You've got so many things going on. It's new and different every day. And I interviewed with Arthur Andersen, really loved the guy I talked to, and decided, I think this will be better for me from a sort of sense of adventure and wanting to continually grow perspective. And I remember telling my dad, and he was so mad at me, like, you just threw away that, 4 years of all that hard work. And I said, Dad, I can always go back to it if I don't like this Arthur Andersen thing. And he's like, you're not an accountant. I said, well, it's not just accounting, right? So 4 years, 2 years turned into 33 years. And again, I got really lucky getting into Accenture very early on in the upward trajectory of the consulting division. So no designing screws for me. And it's funny because I have friends who did go into aerospace, and they have great jobs and it's exciting, but do tend to spend quite a bit of time in one area. So I'm very glad of the choice that I made.
That's awesome. And you mentioned earlier that you have 3 kids. Where did that fit into the span of your career and your growth?
Yeah, let's see. So Katie, my daughter, was born, 3 years after my husband and I got married. I was a manager at Accenture, so about 4 levels at Accenture: analyst, consultant, manager, managing directors, probably a few more now. I felt at that point that I was 29, so felt I had decent control over my work, and it was time to have a child. I remember my biggest concern was that when I went back to Accenture after my maternity leave, that I would get staffed out of town. And I got very lucky because we had enough work in town. At that point, we were living in San Francisco, that I was able to stay in town, really for the next several years. And I do believe that would have been a breaking point for me if I would have, been staffed 5 days a week out of town. I don't think I would have probably lasted. Fortunately, things have changed both from a client and Accenture perspective, and most people don't travel Monday through Friday anymore, so there's a lot more balance options. But yeah, so I worked in town, and then we moved to Chicago, and was still working, about to become a partner at our, was in a private company, and thought, okay, it's time for the second child. And sure enough, while I was pregnant with the second child, actually 7 months pregnant, I sold a multi-$100-million deal. And it was funny because I remember distinctively wearing this red maternity dress. And the guy that I was working for said to me, "Stay seated while we're closing this deal so they don't really notice how pregnant you are." And I said, "Bob, they know I'm pregnant, right? We've been working with these guys, the clients." And he's like, "Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that obvious." I'm like, "Bob, stop." It became a bit of a joke between us. But, went off, had the baby at a really inopportune time because the project was starting. So, but made it work, did a few calls. I think in that case, I went back to work a little bit earlier, but also worked part-time for a little bit longer. And then, 5 years later, I think, I laughed because, my husband always wanted to have a third child. And I was like, the 2 careers, this is enough. But I thought at one point, like, gosh, things are going great at work. Everything's under control at home. And I got pregnant right away with the third child. And then literally the next month, I did the hardest project I've ever done at Accenture. I worked an entire month straight, no breaks. And I was in my first trimester. So, and I think that was my payback for like, yeah. You think you're under control, your kids are always in control, right? So, but it all turned out fine. So anyway, the youngest one just left for college, so it's a long journey. And certainly, it was difficult at a lot of times. Having 3 kids and both my husband and I working was very challenging. We always had nannies and lots of different combinations of daycare. But I think my kids are very resilient, and I think they credit that to having to do a lot on their own pretty early on in life. So far so good, knock wood, right?
Yeah, I think I love that we're talking about this because I think so frequently we don't see what happens behind the work. So we either know a woman from what she does behind in her personal life, right? And we don't have any idea how impactful she is in her work. Or we see her at work and we don't get to see anything about what happens behind the scenes. Yeah. So I'd love, do you have I have 4 little kids. Did you do something that you're like, if I were to do one thing over and over again, it would be this?
Oh, you mean something that I did do?
Yeah.
We had a live-in nanny, and that was a condition of from me of having children. So when my husband and I were talking about having children, I was pretty insistent that we would have a live-in nanny. He was appalled by the idea to start. And the reason that we did that was I knew that neither one of us was particularly good at keeping to a regular schedule. So he runs late almost all the time, and I knew that my job would usually mean I'd have to stay late at work quite a bit, especially back in the 90s when we didn't have all the sort of telecommuting options we have today and all the technology. And I just thought I just can't be beholden to a schedule, like a really fixed schedule for pickup. And so that live-in nanny situation worked very well for our family. And we were fortunate to have one nanny for quite a long time, who actually, she was just a wonderful person. She moved with us a couple times from California to Illinois, and then from Illinois to New Jersey. And then after a year in New Jersey, she said, I can't do this anymore in New Jersey. I don't live her. But anyway, went back, and then we had other live-in nannies. And, it pretty much always worked out. When the kids got older, the older ones were in high school, we went to come and go nanny. But by that point, my husband was working from home. His business moved to home. So there was just a little more control in the house. But I would do that again.
Nice.
That worked well for us.
Yeah, and I love how you frame that, because not everything works for everybody. But when we do showcase, hey, this is an option. I had a really great conversation with a woman, a female founder the other day, and she was like, tell me about like how you do your day. Like, I need to know how you actually do it. And we kind of just walked through it. Like, I wake up at 6 a.m. and I wake up when the first child screams for me, because if I set an alarm, they'll call for me 15 minutes before the alarm. It doesn't matter. Like, somehow they have some sense. And,
yes, they do.
I wake up when they wake up, and we always have breakfast as a family, because everything that happens in the rest of the day, I don't have a whole lot of control over. But breakfast, we can do. And so we have breakfast as a family. And then we go about our individual days, and then we come back together at the end. And I try to be there for tuck-in. That is really a priority. Yeah. And most nights it's much better than that, but some days it's not. And kind of having a minimum acceptable engagement really helps me know, like, well, listen, I didn't do it all today, and that's not possible, but I did do this, and that's getting by. That's good enough. Right.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
You can't beat yourself up.
No, that's because if you spend so much time there, then you're not doing the best that you can do any other place.
That's right.
I have a really specific question for you. Did you miss things?
Oh, I missed a ton of things. Yeah. And, I have the usual funny stories about trying to get to something and, being late when Halloween took 2.5 hours to get home from work because we had a snowstorm in Chicago, and there was my daughter wearing this beautiful princess outfit. She's 3, and, trick-or-treating was basically over by that point. And so we went to like 3 houses, and she's just waited and waited for me. I mean, I can remember her face just so, it's like it's in front of me now. Yeah, I definitely miss things. So, and, some, I don't think you have to go to every baseball game or every concert. I think I made the majority of things that were important. I don't ever hear my kids complain about what I missed. Maybe if you had them on the podcast, they would probably recall exactly what I missed and how painful it was to them. But at this point, it's contrasted with, I was fortunate to be able to take my kids with me on some business trips, and each one of them got to go on at least one. And I know that they would, and most of them were out of the country. And so I know that they would talk about that as that was a really, fun and interesting and different experience to get to go with mom and, go on a trip with her somewhere exotic in the world. And not that makes up for everything, but I think there's definitely some trade-offs when you are a working parent.
I think that's another thing to talk about because I don't feel like I hear that enough, and I miss things. I miss things sometimes. I missed a band concert, and it was hard. I wish I had been there, and
Yeah.
I'm also really glad that I get to do the work that I do.
Yeah, me too.
And I can't make every choice. I'm not cloned, so there are times that it has to be a more difficult choice. But one thing that I made a rule about when I had Lexi, who's now almost 11, was I was never going to apologize for working and traveling.
Right.
Because I really felt like, I really felt like that sent the wrong message. Like, I get to do this work and I love it. And if I feel sad and I'm apologizing for doing it, then that makes her feel like the work is more important than her and I'm still taking it. It just didn't feel good. And so I just said, I'm never going to be sad or apologetic about leaving to go and work. I'm always going to treat it like it's the best option for me because I love it, because that's the truth.
Well, and here's the other thing. So for my generation, so sort of end baby boomer, beginning Generation Xer, if you were to look at the way my parents were, or any of my friends' parents, and in that case, like my mom worked, but a lot of moms were not working then. They did not show up for much of anything. My parents came to the main stuff, but there was zero pressure to go to a practice. And you figured out your own way to get there. And no one would have ever apologized for missing a soccer game or a swim meet or anything like that, right? So, and I remember a friend of mine telling me was he really good at? He had some high school sport and that he was great at. And he said his parents didn't go to one of his events, not one in high school. And he said, I never thought about it. I took a bus to get there till I could drive, and then I drove there. And he said, I never thought about the fact that my parents weren't there. And, it's only, I think, culturally it's become, there's so much pressure on parents to do everything. And if you think back, I certainly wasn't raised in a culture where a parent had to go to every single thing. Like my parents were certainly supportive and went to a lot of my events, but they didn't go to everything. And I don't remember thinking any ill of it. Right. So anyway, yeah. So, and there's way more stuff for kids too. So they, you can just be inundated. I mean, with lots of kids in school, you're going to have there's just a lot going on, right?
Did you set boundaries with your kids on activities and things like that?
Yes, I think we probably did. My kids are not, they were decent at sports, they're decent at what they were doing, but none of them was a particularly, an overachiever in the sense that they were going to early morning practices or playing 10 sports at once or anything like that. So I don't remember it necessarily becoming an issue. But I have seen quite a few parents who have been in that situation. And I would set some boundaries for sure.
Yeah, we've been thinking a lot about that because Lexi's starting to get into a number of different things. And it's like, well, we have 4 kids, so this has to scale. What we decide here needs to scale. And it isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. That's the other thing that I always have to keep on reminding myself. And you have 3 kids, so I'd love to know your perspective. Like, did you keep it fair or did you, everybody got what they needed?
I'm positive that my children would say it was completely unfair, that my daughter, the oldest one, had the worst set of rules laid down on her, and her youngest brother gets away with murder. Having said that, I think we tried to be as fair as possible, and certainly we learned along the way, how things like curfew when they get into high school, and how to set those boundaries really tightly. I think from a financial perspective is very fair. They're fortunately none of my kids is particularly high maintenance financially. I mean, if they wanted to go to a camp in the summer or something like that, usually if it was reasonable, we'd send them. Sometimes they had to earn their own money to go to things, depending, but we were pretty fair-handed about that. Again, if you had the three of them on, I think you'd hear a totally different story right now. I think maybe in 10 years when they're a little older, maybe one or two of them has their own children, they'll look at it and say, yeah, I think they were pretty fair.
Yeah, I'm always looking at it and being like, I'm not looking for a once and for all solution on everything, so does this work for us right now? Great, then that's what we're doing. And if we have to change it in the future, that's what we have to do.
And we did, and I, like cell phones, when you get a cell phone, and certainly because I had an 8-year span between the first and the third, that year moved back, right, for my two boys, from my daughter, and she, of course, pointed that out to us, but that's just what happens from a society and culture perspective. So you just sort of roll with it. Yeah. And again, that's just, you can't defend yourself to your kids, right? You have to be strong between your husband and your wife or your spouse, however you do it.
So looking back at your career in Accenture, did you think this is how it was going to go? Or did you, when you were just new at Arthur Andersen and starting out, did you think this was going to look different?
Well, I don't know how I thought it was going to look. It was a long time ago, and as an aerospace engineer, taking a job, doing something totally different, I don't remember how I thought it was going to look, other than I was excited to finally have some money because I was so broke during college, and be able to do some traveling and, hopefully one day meet somebody and get married. I always knew I wanted to have kids. The thing that was probably the biggest change for me that I never would have expected is Accenture grew from 5,000 people to 425,000 people by the time I retired. And we went from being part of Arthur Andersen to then being a separate private company to then going public. And our geographic presence, our functional presence, our industry presence, everything changed. We became the world's largest consulting company and systems integrator. And with that growth came, quite a few monetary awards, right? And so the fact that I joined a company that has done so well financially, I never would have expected, ever. I don't think anybody could have predicted it. And we, very lucky. We've always had fantastic leadership. I like to think, because I was there early on, I had some hand in it, but I think that more than anything else would be, looking at Liz Martin of 1984 versus Liz Tinkham of 2019. I never would have predicted, ever. And I've just been very blessed and fortunate.
You wrote an amazing blog post near your last day at Accenture, a letter to Liz Martin, that we will link to in the show notes. It was just such a touching
I think you might have helped me with that. Thank you.
Well, I wanted it. I wanted to know what you would have said to that girl just starting out, because I think in a lot of ways, I really see us each as starting out again. Today was a fresh day, and we all started out in the same way that you did. And I love the advice that you gave to yourself all of those years ago. And I want to bring out one of those points in particular, if you don't mind. Is that okay?
Nope, that's fine.
All right, I'm going to read it because I don't know if you have it in front of you. But you say, take control of your 40s. Goodness, the wander years. Your career is going to rocket through your 20s and 30s. But you are going to let it stall in your 40s. You will wander for a few years without a career anchor. Don't wander for too long. Find a coach who will kick you out of your doldrums and help you get back on track. There's always more to learn. There's always a place for your curiosity to thrive. Oh, Liz, I just have so many chills just reading this again, because I feel like you could take control of your 40s and say, Cass, take control of 39. Tell me more about this.
So in my early 40s, so at that point, I was relatively senior for my age. I had done very well up to that point. So say I'm 40, 41-ish at this point, and I got an opportunity to take a big step up on a project in New Jersey, which is what led us to move to New Jersey. And so I took it, and I didn't realize I was going to be sort of the poster child for the whole project when I got out there, and the face of it in a lot of ways. And the project failed miserably, and for lots and lots of reasons. Not I contributed to it for sure, but I certainly wasn't the main cause by any means. And I was, after 3 years of just blood, sweat, tears, working around the clock, dragging my family to New Jersey. And it was, it just killed me, emotionally and professionally. I lost money because the project failed. So I, got a reduction in my pay, and it was very public within Accenture what had happened. And again, it was sometimes, when you do, it was sort of a pioneering engagement, and I love that thing. I love sort of being the first one to try something, but that comes with a lot of risk, right? And the good news is what we tried might not have worked that well on this project, but we went on to we did the same thing at other clients, having learned from the first one that went really well. So that's good. So we took good lessons out of it. But for me and a couple of the other people who were in the leadership roles, I felt like we were sort of the scorched earth left behind. And I felt sorry for myself. I mean, honestly, it dragged me down. I felt really sorry for myself for a long time, and too long. I didn't get out of my misery quickly enough. And what I needed was two things. One was for someone to realize that I needed a quick win, somewhere where I could regain my confidence, because it took it out of me, from a confidence perspective, and put me into a project where they knew I was going to succeed. And actually, and the reason I know that is because a couple of my peers on the project had that happen to them, and they bounced back pretty quickly. Instead, I decided I needed to take a few months off, and my bosses were like very conciliatory and nice about the whole thing. Yeah, you should do that, blah, 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 which was great because my kids were one was going in high school, one was in junior high, and the other one was going into kindergarten. So it was a good time. But the second thing I really needed for a person like me was a swift kick in the butt to say, stop wallowing in your sorrow. You will overcome this. Get back on your horse and dive back in. And when it just took me a few years to realize that. And then when I dove back in, and I didn't really dive, I sort of tiptoed back in. And once I got back in, it had been 4 or 5 years of a little bit of wandering, I'd say. And, those are really critical years in your career where I should have been taking on the next big project, because I was still loved in the eyes of Accenture. The good news is you get a second chance there, and they appreciated me taking one for the team, so to speak, even though I didn't really think that that was something to be appreciated. So, but I just needed to get back up and keep going. And I wish somebody would have said to me, you're missing. These are really critical years in your career where if you're really going to, really succeed and get into the C-suite, these are the years that you need to be making your mark and continue to move up, learn more about something new, take on something new and bigger. And again, I eventually did that, but it wasn't probably till my mid to late 40s when I got back up. It was a hard period. And I get a lot of feedback about that point because I think people see themselves in that. It could happen in your 30s, unlikely in your 20s, but it could happen in your 30s as well, or even in your 50s, depending on your career span.
Yeah, and I think that those two pieces of advice is to get a quick win, regain that confidence, find the success, seek it, go after it. And then, have somebody in your life, whether it's a coach or just a mentor, somebody that's going to give you a kick to say, hey, you got better in you, let's do it.
Yeah, I can contrast it to after I had Katie, my first baby. I was out on my project. It was a San Francisco-based project, and I was working with a woman who had 2 kids. Again, I got really lucky because I had some women mentors early on, and she was sort of very tough, a very good friend of mine to this day. And one day I was, it's like overwhelmed and thinking, oh, this isn't going to work. I'm not going to be able to work and have this baby, and maybe I should quit. Maybe I was articulating that to her, and she just looked at me. She said, oh, would you quit? You love this work, and she's going to be fine. And, you just need to get over it. And as soon as she said that, I was over it. And that's what I needed. I needed my Betty moment. Like, she needed to say to me, like, stop feeling sorry for yourself. So get back and going.
I love that. Did you have a coach at that time? Because you mentioned coach specifically, and I'm curious about that.
No. I mean, I have a mentor at Accenture, and I probably should have consulted her, but no, I didn't. The problem was I was so embarrassed by what had happened, and I was so like, just like, I felt bad for myself because I got kind of set up into the situation, and I just was mad at the whole thing. So I was embarrassed to talk to anybody about it too, right? So, and I thought I knew what I was doing. Like, I just need some time off, and I'm sure I'll be better, and maybe I should do something else. And all the wrong advice. So, advice to myself.
Yeah, I love that. I particularly love this last line. There's always more to learn. There's always a place for your curiosity to thrive. So I'm curious, Liz, what are you learning now?
Well, that's a great point, because one thing I did not do very well at Accenture is continuous learning. And I learned a lot as I grew through the firm, and obviously as took on different projects. But having the 3 kids and working full time, that was it. Like, I boundaried around that, and that was about as much time as I could set aside. What I tell my students now is, I believe, given the way that technology is changing and things in general are changing, and the speed of everything, is that you need to set aside 4 hours a week during your work week, not on Saturdays or Sundays that will be eaten up rightfully by your family, but like 2 hours Monday morning and 2 hours Wednesday afternoon, or an hour every day, and read or take an online class and continue to grow in your career. So, and I think if you start scheduling a time as soon as you start working, it will become a muscle, and it will become something that you will always do. And I believe it is incredibly important. So to that end, I am taking some additional classes on blockchain. I just finished one on AI. MIT Sloan has a really interesting online program for executives in technology in business. And even though I do know a fair amount about technology, this is a little bit deeper dive, and you have to write a paper, and it's a little stressful to get the paper in. And every Tuesday there's an assignment. And so, sometimes at 7:30, because it's due at 8 o'clock, I'm jamming away on my on my laptop. My husband's laughing at me. But I'm continuing to do that. And then these boards that I've joined have been in technology companies that I know something about, but I've learned a ton working with sort of these small technology boards. It's been really fun. I have more time now, so it's easier. But again, I wish I would have done more of that when I was working full time.
That's great advice. And I love how tactical you got with that. 4 hours during the week, set it aside from the very beginning or today. And
right.
Just really find a way to continue to learn and be curious about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, and that could be listening to your podcast on the way to work, right? Or other podcasts, listening to books on tape. So it's more accessible too to do that. And I do think it needs to be something you're intellectually curious about. So it's not necessarily that if you have to be in your field, but I do believe you just have to be learning, continuously, because you're going to get left behind if you don't.
Yeah. Oh, this is so good. Okay, another tactical question. What tactical thing do you do each week that brings you joy?
Oh. Well, is it okay if I answer something I do multiple times a week?
Please, yes.
I exercise quite a bit now that I'm pre-tired. So I do Soul Cycle probably 3 times a week.
Nice.
And I absolutely love it. It's hard as heck, but I absolutely love it. So I'd say doing that brings me joy. Every time I go in there, even if I'm dead tired, I just know the music and the instructor, as my husband says, I can't believe you were having somebody pay that much money to have somebody yell at you for 45 minutes, but I don't think it's yelling. I think it's inspiration. So I love it. And it brings me joy.
I love that. As a woman that has been so successful in business, what do you see as your greatest advantage?
think about if you had some fruit on a table and you had 10 apples and one orange, your eye's going to be drawn to the orange. So, I was the different person in the room almost 100% of the time, as particularly when I got to be a managing director. So just by virtue of that, if I had a question, I opened my mouth, I would usually always be listened to, heard, maybe not always heard, but listened to at least, and recognized because I was the anomaly. And I think a lot of times, particularly when I worked outside of the United States, if I started talking, everyone would just look at me. And usually because I was fairly senior early on in my career, I carried that weight with me too. So I'd get back to like, oh my gosh, here's this woman. She's very senior. She looks so young because of blonde hair and, that type of thing. And people would listen. And I, call it being a woman or calling it being the orange in a bowl of apples, right? That would be the thing that I was able to do.
I think that's such a great point because we do have that, the orange in the bowl of apples. I think that's such a great analogy because the orange gets an opportunity to speak, and that's awesome.
Right.
I'm curious, you mentioned this delineation between listened to and heard, and how do you see those two things being different?
Well, you've been in a meeting where everyone's nodding their head and pretending that they're definitely listening to you, but to be heard means that they're appreciating the content, taking it in, and formulating either agree or disagree based on what you've said without dismissing you outright. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody, right? Sometimes there's people that I know and they'll start talking. I'm like, I don't want to listen to this person, right? Yeah, I am listening, but I don't want to hear what they have to say because I just know that I'm not going to like it type of thing. So that would be the delineation. And I don't know if people, you can kind of get that feeling when you're in a room, and some people are, they come in with their biases, whatever they may be, right? That you're a woman, that you're an American, that you're young, that you're this, that you're that. And you just have to do your best to work past that.
Yes, I think the delineation is one of great importance, and I think that when you are an orange in a bowl of red apples, people will give you an opportunity to be listened to, and by having credible and thoughtful things to say, then you become heard. And I think you likely brought that. You earn being heard almost.
Yeah. I did earn it, and also I never was one to hold back. I always express my opinion. I tend to be the person who would call out things that were wrong. No, was wrong the right word, but problematic that maybe some people weren't as brave to want to talk about, right? And so I kind of got that reputation. So I would be the one to say, wait a minute, I know we're all thinking that's a good idea, but what about this or that? Or sort of talk about the elephant in the room and how we're going to get past that. Because one thing I absolutely hate is when you spend a lot of time with people in a meeting and everyone's nodding their head in agreement, and then you leave the meeting, you're like, what are we doing? What did we all agree to? It's just sort of, people just want to get out of the meeting, so they'll passively agree, but then they won't go do it. And I tend to be the person to say, wait. I see a lot of nodding of heads, but what does that mean? Like, you're going to do, and you're going to do, and you're going to do, and are we all really in agreement to doing that? Because if not, then please speak up and say something, because otherwise it's just a huge waste of time, right? And so I earned that reputation early on in my career, and that kept with me, right? So, and I think that was useful in quite a few situations. Sometimes it got me in a little trouble, because sometimes some people might have thought, would you just shut up already? But maybe sometimes I pushed it a little too hard. But anyway, most of the time it worked out pretty well for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I can see how you were that truth teller in a room. full of people that maybe did not
Right.
want to do that. Yeah. I think, there's a lot of value in that. And obviously, the way and how you led was indicative of that and well-worthy.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, I have just a handful of lightning round questions to ask. But
all right.
Before we get into those, I wanted to know, is there anything that you wanted to talk about today, you wanted to share that we didn't naturally uncover?
Yeah. I mean, since I have retired, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and certainly the discussion around women in business and the Me Too movement and things have been really interesting to me, and have caused me to reflect on a couple things. One would be sort of, gosh, I don't have a Me Too moment. Mm-hmm. And that's really interesting. Why not? And then secondly, was I complicit in allowing some of those things to happen to women? And so, if you get another minute here, a couple of interesting reflection points. One is on, why it didn't happen to me. I have 3 very good friends. We're all the same age and all worked most of our lives and get together once or twice a year. And none of us actually experienced any Me Too moments. I mean, and I don't know if it was our age or our demeanor or, we all had sort of different jobs, but we never had them. And so we kind of think that's interesting. I think what we all believe is that we didn't let them happen to us. Not that people want to, not that anybody asks for that, but perhaps the way we approach things and just some of we're all pretty straightforward and assertive. Maybe meant that we were less likely to have that happen, but we do feel fortunate, and we certainly knew people that was going on with, but we thought it was interesting that none of us had it. And then we reflected on whether we were complicit, and I feel badly that as the head of inclusion and diversity at times throughout my career, was I letting some of this go by, and perhaps I was, and I hope not, but you do sit back and think about it, right? And I'm really glad for the conversation now. And really, and a lot of it has been swept over, and I did see a lot of it being swept over, and I'd like to think I helped to make a difference, but it is incremental, right? And I'm really glad for everything that's going on now and people really, really speaking up. Only thing I would say, and I say this to my kids all the time, is if you look for injustice in the world, or if you look for things that are going to go wrong, or what could happen to you, or how people are slighting you, you're going to find it. And so, I think maybe I've always approached life with a lens of optimism and a lens of giving people sort of a chance. And maybe when people have dumb things to say, like that guy who said, sit down when you're pregnant, or when I first got pregnant, the partner I was working for yelled, "Oh my God, that's awful. You're going to quit. I don't even want to talk to you anymore." And I just looked at him and I'm like, be serious. I'm not going to quit. I made a joke out of the whole thing, and I really went after him. And, he had right to say that, because the 4 women in our office ahead of me had all quit after they'd had children. And he was furious that I was pregnant. He was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Tom, stop it." But, in today's world, that might be misinterpreted. And I just punched him right back and said, "Shut up, I'm coming back to work and I'm going to prove it to you," right? So just got to be careful about really thinking through, people's intentions. I just think people make dumb mistakes all the time, and they're not always intentional. And having some grace around, sort of second chances, I think is a good thing. Maybe that was a little long-winded. So.
No, I think I love what you had to say about that, because I think that there is, for anybody that's been in a leadership role in the path of the Me Too movement, right? There's been this feeling of, am I complicit? And I've looked at in a number of situations, and at the end of the day, I've come to this kind of conclusion that when we know better, we do better. And for what I knew, I did the best that I could. And for what I know now, right? for what I know now, I do the best that I can. And if one day that turns out to not be good enough, well, that's something that I'll have to deal with in that moment. But to look for the injustice and to look for the slight, that is, you're creating what you look for.
You can. Yeah, you can.
And if I want to find the opportunity, then that's what I need to be looking for.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to be dismissive of my, things that have happened that I knew of, that have gone on with women I know of all working in all different places. I mean, certainly it's awful, but you just have to think positively. And I think me as a leader, I know I took on a lot of men on a lot of issues related to women and punched them right back and said, "You're just being so stupid about that." And they would listen to me like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Now that I think about it that way." Right. But sometimes I think stupidity is at the root of that rather than anything malicious. So.
Yes. I think, when we consider the intent, it gives people a little bit more room to be human.
Yeah.
And we all need that. We all need a little space to be human.
For sure.
Awesome. All right. What is your go-to song when you need to up your energy?
LA Woman by the Doors.
Nice. What time do you wake up?
7.
What do you have for breakfast?
Either eggs or Greek yogurt, like plain Greek yogurt.
Do you have a favorite ritual?
Not really. As I said, I love to go to Soul Cycle, and I love to listen to Kara Swisher podcast and The Daily. I listen to The Daily every day. That would be about it, though.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Morning person or a night owl?
Morning.
What is the book you give the most?
The book I give the most is Mountains Beyond Mountains. It's the story of Dr. Paul Farmer, and I think it's by Tracy Kidder. And it's the story of a current contemporary, Dr. Paul Farmer, who works for Brigham Women's Health out in Boston. And he goes to Haiti to cure AIDS. And he does it using an anthropological approach that's really interesting. And since reading that book, I approach most of life's larger problems, looking at things with a sort of a wider systematic or sort of anthropological lens, rather than just looking at the problem as you see it on the surface.
Wow, I'm going to have to read that. That sounds amazing.
It's a great book. It's really inspiring.
What can someone do to help you feel appreciated?
Send me an email thank you note.
Nice. Can our guests here follow you, or our listeners here follow you online?
Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn at Liz Tinkham, and I'm supposed to have my Twitter handle, which I believe is also, let me look it up, is also at Liz Tinkham, or it might be it. Hold on. I don't post a lot. I probably post mostly on LinkedIn. I'm not a big Twitter user, so yeah.
We'll include the links to that in the show notes too.
Yeah, but please follow me on. I'm at Liz Tinkham on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Liz, thank you so much. This has been such an awesome conversation. I've learned a ton, and it was great. Thank you.
Thank you.